April 1945. Berlin. The dream of a thousand-year Reich has crumbled into a concrete tomb. As Allied forces close in from all sides, a steel avalanche rolls in from the east, over 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, an unstoppable wave poised to crash down upon the city. This isn't just another battle, it's the brutal, fiery culmination of World War II in Europe, a meticulously planned annihilation. You think you know the story of Berlin's fall? Think again. This wasn't merely a desperate last stand. It was a calculated, savage, and overwhelming display of military might. Stick around, because we're diving deep into how the Soviet Red Army, through meticulous planning and sheer force, systematically dismantled Berlin's defenses and delivered the final blow to Nazi Germany. Early 1945. The once mighty Third Reich is a dwindling shadow. From the west, the Allies surge across the Rhine. From the east, the Soviet behemoth, having decimated German forces, stands poised at the Oder River, a mere 60 to 75 kilometers from Berlin. For Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, Berlin wasn't just a military objective, it was the ultimate prize. It was vengeance for the staggering 26 million Soviet lives lost in the war. He was fiercely determined to capture the city before the Western Allies could, aiming to carve out significant territories for the post-war Soviet zone and, perhaps, even lay hands on German nuclear secrets. The race for Berlin was on, a high-stakes chess match with millions of lives in the balance. And the force assembled for this final assault. One of history's most formidable military machines. Picture this. Reports suggest over 1.5 to 2.5 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, figures around 6,250 are cited, supported by over 41,000 artillery pieces and something in the region of 7,500 to 8,500 aircraft. Marshals Georgy Zhukov, commanding the 1st Belarusian Front, and Ivan Konev, with the 1st Ukrainian Front, were entrusted with this monumental task. Marshal Rokossovsky's 2nd Belarusian Front would later join to slam the door shut. Their deep battle doctrine, honed through years of savage conflict, was all about penetrating enemy lines, encircling them, and then achieving complete annihilation. So, what could Germany muster against this impending tidal wave? Honestly, precious little. They were on their last legs. Operation Clausewitz, Berlin's defense plan, was initiated in March 1945. General Gotthard Heinrici, a respected defensive tactician in charge of Army Group Vistula, knew the odds were astronomically stacked against them. He correctly surmised the main Soviet offensive would strike across the Oder River and chose to make his stand at the Seelow Heights, a natural defensive ridge approximately 90 kilometers east of Berlin. German engineers worked relentlessly. They flooded the Oder's floodplain, attempting to create a swamp to impede the Soviet advance. Beyond this, they constructed 3 substantial defensive belts: the Wotan position, fortified with anti-tank ditches, concrete gun emplacements, elaborate trench systems, and bunkers. Berlin itself was declared a fortress. General Helmut Weidling eventually assumed command of the Berlin defense area. The orders were stark: defend to the last man. Every street, every building, was to become a strongpoint. But who comprised these defenders? A motley assembly of whoever remained. Roughly 45,000 regular army soldiers and the remnants of Waffen-SS divisions formed the core. To these were added Berlin Police, the Hitler Youth, some mere teenagers, and the Volkssturm, an ill-equipped militia of older men, some of whom were veterans of World War I. Propaganda tirelessly urged a fight to the death, but in truth, many understood it was over. Fuel, ammunition, and experienced soldiers were critically low. Those advanced German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. Magnificent machines, but their numbers were insufficient, and they were often immobilized by fuel shortages or rapidly destroyed by Soviet firepower. April 16, 1945. The storm erupts. Zhirkov's first Belarusian front crashed into the Silo Heights, immediately following one of the most staggering artillery barrages in history. It's said nearly 2 million shells were fired, aiming to simply obliterate the German defenses. Zhukov even employed 143 searchlights, hoping to blind the German defenders and illuminate the battlefield for his own advancing troops. However, that initial assault on Silo Heights proved to be a costly setback for the Soviets. Heinrici, a shrewd commander, had anticipated the barrage and withdrawn his main forces from the front lines just in time, saving countless lives. And those searchlights. Instead of blinding the Germans, the morning mist and dust diffused the light, inadvertently backlighting the advancing Soviets, making them clear targets for the Dugin German guns. For 4 brutal days, the battle for Silo Heights was an inferno. Wave after wave of Soviet troops were thrown against the German defenses. The losses were sickening. Zhukov, with Stalin's relentless pressure, and even taunts that Konev might beat him to Berlin, just kept pushing his men forward. Meanwhile, Konev's first Ukrainian front, attacking further south, achieved a much faster breakthrough, threatening to unravel the entire German defensive line. Finally, on April 19, after concentrating overwhelming firepower and manpower, Zhirkov's forces smashed through at Silo Heights. It cost them dearly. Estimates suggest over 30,000 Soviet dead to perhaps 12,000 Germans, but the road to Berlin was now wide open. Once Silo Heights fell, the Soviet plan to encircle Berlin kicked into high gear. Soviet tank armies fanned out, racing to sever Berlin from the remnants of Germany. To the south, Konev's forces pushed with relentless speed, while Zhirkov's advanced from the east and north. By April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, of all days, Soviet long-range artillery began to pound Berlin itself. That shelling would not cease until the city surrendered. The German Ninth Army, led by General Theodor Busse, was trapped southeast of Berlin near Halbe, along with about 200,000 soldiers and tens of thousands of civilians. Their only hope was a desperate breakout west to link up with General Walther Wenck's 12th Army. The result was the Battle of the Halbe Pocket, a week of brutal fighting under relentless Soviet artillery and air attacks. The escape route became a corridor of death, where soldiers and civilians fell together. Only 25,000 to 30,000 troops and a few thousand civilians broke through, leaving behind utter devastation. By April 25th, elements of Zhirkov's and Konev's fronts met west of Berlin. The city was completely encircled. Berlin was isolated, its defenders trapped. There was no hope of backup, no hope of supplies. Hitler's orders for counterattacks from armies that barely existed, like Army Detachment Steiner, were nothing more than pure delusion. Those units were either phantoms or had already been smashed to pieces. The fight for Berlin itself. It was a descent into an urban inferno. The Soviets, having learned bitter lessons in places like Stalingrad, adapted their tactics. They formed combined arms assault groups, infantry, supported by tanks like the T-34 and the heavy IS-2s, engineers laden with explosives and flamethrowers, and, of course, overwhelming artillery. They would systematically neutralize German strongpoints, block by block, house by house. The fighting was brutal, up close, and intensely personal. The German defenders, despite being massively outnumbered and outgunned, utilized the city's layout to their advantage. Buildings were transformed into mini-fortresses. Streets were barricaded with rubble and tramcars. Every window could conceal a sniper or a Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket. The Waffen-SS, Hitler Youth, and even Volkssturm units often fought with a terrifying fanaticism. They knew that surrendering to the Red Army, hungry for revenge, was a horrifying prospect. They positioned snipers and machine guns on upper floors, as Soviet tank guns had difficulty elevating to such angles, while Panzerfaust teams lurked in cellars, waiting to ambush tanks. Key defensive areas included the vast Tiergarten Park, the government district, and the formidable flak towers, massive concrete structures that the Soviets found incredibly challenging to overcome. The Soviet advance was slow, methodical, and savage. They would use their artillery to pulverize defensive positions before sending in tanks and infantry. Heavy howitzers fired directly into buildings at point-blank range. Flamethrowers were employed to clear out entrenched defenders. The battles for key locations, such as Tempelhof Airport, the Anhalter Bahnhof, and across the Spree and Landwehr Canal were especially vicious. Every street, every U-Bahn station, every bombed-out building became its own small, desperate battlefield. The cost in lives, on both sides, was enormous. The Soviets suffered grievously in this street fighting, losing nearly 2,000 tanks and an estimated 81,000 killed or missing in the entire Berlin operation. If this deep dive into one of history's most intense military strategies has you hooked, show your support by hitting that like button. And to make sure you don't miss out on more analyses of critical historical conflicts and tactics, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We're committed to bringing you the stories behind these pivotal moments. The Reichstag, symbol of Nazi Germany, became a key Soviet target. Stalin demanded the Soviet flag fly over it by May Day. The battle began in late April, with SS, sailors, and Volkssturm dug in, using its strong walls and nearby flooded craters for defense. Soviet troops from the 150th Rifle Division fought brutal close-quarters battles, room by room. On April 30th, Sergeants Yegorov and Kanteria raised the victory banner atop the burning building, though fighting inside continued for 2 more days. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Reich Chancellery in the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler was facing his own end. Berlin was completely surrounded, Soviet troops were closing in on the Chancellery, and his fantasies of miracle armies arriving to the rescue had all evaporated. On April 30, 1945, with Soviet shells exploding all around, Hitler and his new wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide. His final orders were for their bodies to be burned so they would not fall into Soviet hands. With Hitler gone, the will to continue fighting began to disintegrate among what remained of the German command, although some die-hard SS units persisted in their resistance. General Weidling, the commander of the Berlin garrison, recognized the utter hopelessness of the situation. Wanting to prevent any more pointless deaths of soldiers and civilians, he initiated surrender discussions. On May 2, 1945, Weidling officially surrendered the Berlin garrison to General Vasily Chukov of the Soviet 8th Guards Army. The Battle of Berlin was over. The city was a wasteland. Years of Allied bombing and the final battle reduced Berlin to rubble. At least 125,000 civilians died in the battle alone. German military losses reached up to 100,000 dead, 220,000 wounded, and nearly 500,000 captured. The Soviets paid heavily too, about 81,000 killed or missing, and over 280,000 wounded. The Battle of Berlin was the brutal, yet inevitable, climax of World War II in Europe. It showcased the Soviet Union's overwhelming military power and strategic precision, honed by years of brutal combat. Their careful planning, sheer numbers, and ruthless tactics ensured Nazi Germany's final collapse. For the German defenders, it was a desperate, fanatical fight against certain defeat. Berlin's ruins stood as a grim reminder of Hitler's failed ambitions and the devastating cost of war, a final act whose consequences shaped the world for decades. What other pivotal battles or military strategies do you think we should tackle next? Let us know your ideas in the comments section below. And be sure to explore our other videos, where we break down the critical moments that have defined our modern world. Thanks for watching. This is History Replay, This Day.